What's up, fellas?
Hey, good morning, guys.
Tony,
How are we doing?
Greg.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning for Andy and Jim.
Yep.
I just had my bowl of cereal this morning and there was a lot of chalk in the cereal.
I like chalk.
Yeah.
We're recording, so I don't like the whining about the we don't have Cinderellas. Who cares about Cinderellas? I mean, we remember Valpo, we remember Bryce Drew in the shot, we remember certain teams, but for the most part, I mean, at one point, Butler was a Cinderella, and then they become a mainstream team, and Gonzaga was a Cinderella.
Back-to-back finals.
Like, yeah, look, this is an NIL casualty. We just got to get used to it. And for us,
no, we don't have to get used to it.
Yeah,
no,
it's not changing, Greg. So yes,
then their numbers are going down. Nobody's going to watch.
I hope we're taking that.
How is it not bullshit? People like parody.
People aren't going to watch the NCAA
tournament.
If people don't want to watch the NCAA tournament because 15 seed Norfolk State.
I didn't say they wouldn't watch the tournament. They're not going to watch the first two rounds.
And then Jim, they're going to watch everything. They are going to watch everything because you can bet on it, and more people are betting on sports than ever before.
Jim, all those people that
we find a way to whine about everything. I mean,
hey, I don't whine about everything, but it's just a fact. Jim, all those people that have all those scheduled appearances that are going to come there those first 2 days in Vegas, what do you think is going to happen to them? Are they going to keep coming?
No. Yep.
No.
They will.
No.
They will.
I agree with Andy. Of course they will.
The thing that's going to drive this is that if the Cinderellas don't have let's say there's 68 teams, but only the way it's going now, we're going to have only 30 teams, 35 teams, maybe 40 teams that have any chance, any prayer whatsoever to win, because all the good players, and they should. Now, I read this article where forget the nil, because the nil only really attracts the real upper scale people, the players that are going to all be NBA pros anyway. So that's a little bit different. It's the portal. Here's a kid. Yep. He transfers from a school where he's playing 40 minutes. He goes to another school. He gets $20,000 for the portal, a 1-year deal. He goes there. He gets his $20,000. Now he's only playing 15 minutes because the school is better and they're better athletes. So he's there. He's sitting on the bench now. But he got his $20,000. What does he do at the end of the year? He finds another school to give him $15,000 because he didn't play much the year before, so he didn't get as much. But he moves for another $15,000. Now he's only playing 10 minutes a game. So this is what's going. It's the portal that's more the problem than the nil.
But that's one type. There's also the type like Dalton Connect, who becomes one of the top players in the country, going from Northern Colorado to Tennessee. And this happens all the time. It's the same thing with coaches. I mean, we've had this for decades on end. Phil Martelli Jr. just took the VCU job. Is he ready for that? The only reason he got the Bryant gig is because their head coach got into some hot water legally. And 2 years later, now Martelli Jr. is at VCU. You strike when the iron's hot. I'll never begrudge a kid an opportunity that's really what this boils down to. Because
Tony, I agree with you. I want the kids to be able to make the money because that's
where we're at about it.
They've been getting screwed over for years. Mm-hmm. The schools were making all the money. They got all the TV contracts, and the kids are getting shit. And they're getting educations, but a lot of them can't use those educations. They get out and they're still bagging groceries in the grocery store. They could have done 4 years earlier.
The problem is the transfer portal. It's the old ways. You had to sit out a year. I never thought that was fair, but you should limit the number of opportunities that you can have. Maybe you can transfer once, no more than twice, but I'd like to see only one time during transfer. Otherwise, what's the value of it? You're not a college student. You're a basketball player, and don't try to make anything there. You're there to play basketball and maybe make it to a pro league. So, transferring should be restricted to the way, maybe not quite as restrictive as it was before, but you get one opportunity to transfer, and that's it.
How about if they transfer and sign a 2-year deal where they have to remain there for 2 years? That might help a little bit.
Then they'll get a lawyer to avoid themselves out of the 2-year deal.
The other X factor in this whole equation is COVID. We're still dealing with people in college for their 7th season. Some are coming back for an 8th next year because they got an extra COVID year. Once that's out of the way and certain litigation takes hold, I think we'll see a cleaner system.
Andy, I agree with you. But I think the problem here is we have one thing that's sorely lacking. We have lack of legislation of anything that the transfer portal is going to be able to do favorably moving forward, because the NCAA has no balls. They are not a factor here in this equation anymore, and they need to be. This is the wild west out there right now.
To address Greg's concern about parity, we may very well see in the next 5 years pretty much what they did in football. Okay, remember the old 1A, 1AA? Well, now you have the FBS, FCS. You may have the 4 or 5 major conferences. Let's throw the Big East in there and maybe 1 or 2 other.
Exactly.
And you get 68, 70 teams, and that'll become like Division 1A or the FBS, or let's call it the championship division, and then the secondary division of every other school. So that you will now have an NCAA tournament that has a field of maybe 68, and they're all from major conferences, and the other and they can have at the lower level like they do with the FCS playoffs.
What's amusing is the 2025 tournament.
I agree, Andy. That's exactly what's going to happen.
The 2025 tournament has one Cinderella, quote unquote, one lower seed that everybody's going to remember.
Arkansas.
No, it's McNeese. Well, that's funny. Yeah,
oh, okay. I'm talking about the Sweet 16.
Yeah, but I'm talking
technically they're a Cinderella because they're a double-digit seed.
McNeese first 2 days, that smaller school that won, comprised entirely of larger school transfers that kind of fell out of favor at their schools. Yep. With Will Wade, who already had a deal in place when he was coaching them.
I didn't do the numbers, but I have to believe, even with the conference realignments, that the major conferences got more of the at-large bids than they did in recent years. When you'd have the Atlantic 10 get a couple of extra bids, you might have the MAC and/or the Missouri Valley. There were very few true at-large mid-major bids available this year, and that's why we're seeing. Because I know this is one of the topics that Mark put in the agenda. I think right at the top, why there are no Cinderella teams this year. It's because there were not as many Cinderella bids that were offered.
So if
you have 14 teams.
Mandated an investigation, guys, into what's going on in the NCAA basketball tournament, and they did their work, what would their conclusion be? Would it be that the transfer portal has been the biggest culprit? The NCAA lack of anything being the culprit, or the fact that
if they truly believe that these are college student athletes, the transfer portal would be all but eliminated. You go to school for an education. If you're a good basketball player, you get a scholarship, so you don't pay for your education.
And what about a power conference that puts 14 of its 16 teams in the tournament? Yeah. How many athletes in the transfer portal?
How many athletes in the transfer portal ever said, I transferred from Drake to Wisconsin because I didn't like the academic structure at Drake? Well, yeah. You don't hear anybody say that.
But now we're getting into. Now we're not lying about things anymore. Yeah. It is. Yes, I heard Mike Slive on TV. He said we're putting more money into basketball, and these are the results. That's it.
Yep. The biggest issue is not the transfer portal.
It's going to be more successful.
I want to. Maybe somebody knows this answer, and I really don't know the answer to this. So I'm really asking because I really don't know, and I'd like to know what happens. When a coach leaves and he goes to another school and he takes 1 or 2 kids with him from the school, or even sometimes maybe even more, and sometimes nobody, they just go.
Right.
When he takes those athletes from the school he was at to the school he's going to, and what happens to the athletes that are on the school he's going to that already are playing basketball, and there's only so many kids can be on the roster?
Well, let's answer that with Schertz, who took over from 2024 Darling Indiana State, and went to St. Louis, took his best players with him.
Right.
Essentially, he created vacancies. There were spots to be filled that he filled with guys that followed him over from the Sycamores, and he basically said, "Oh, you have a chance to stick on this team, or I'm going to encourage you to transfer." I mean, it's big boy time now.
Yeah, well, I already told you that, Jim. We talked about it. The fact is that if there were not enough scholarships, then the coach will sit the players that were already on the team in their office and tell them, just like Tony said, a grown-up talk. Yep. Look, you're not going to play here, so you need to transfer. I mean, it's just the bottom line.
The other night I had dinner with somebody that played for Texas A&M many years ago, and he said, he's a doctor, he's not a dumb guy, he's a smart guy. I said, what happens? This same question. And he said, well, once you have the scholarship, they can't pull the scholarship, but they can knock you off the team. But now you got a basketball scholarship, and you're not playing at the school anymore.
Well, that just won't really happen, though. No kid is just going to sit in school with a scholarship and not play. He's going to want to play. He'll transfer. It's just
much.
No one's ever going to be like that.
Dion did it at Colorado. I mean, he got criticized initially, and that was that.
And look, to me, the biggest problem is the NIL. It's not the transfer portal. It's because the NIL is the reason why players will constantly go from the mid-major programs to the big programs because they have the money. Before in the transfer portal, you would just say they go from mid-major to mid-major. There's a spot open. I'll go follow this coach. That's fine. But now they're following the money. And that's why all the money and all the players are going to the big programs, which is why that there are no more Cinderellas this year, because all of those players, I mean, look at these great teams that we thought were great teams in the mid-majors, the Akrons or any of the Liberties. We thought that they were great, really mid-major teams, but then we found out that they weren't very good at all if you stack them up against all these other dominant players in the power programs. And so again, look, to me, I said this 25 years ago, that the NBA was going to be fucked if they kept up with this one and done shit. And look what's happening to the NBA today in their ratings. Nobody wants to see this shit. Same thing's going to happen in college basketball. College basketball has two big identifications with it: March Madness, Cinderella. Both are going to go in the garbage. When you lose Cinderella and March Madness, you're not going to, I'm sorry, you are not going to grow the sport. It's going to be the NBA and the ratings will go down. I am telling you right now, but you can fix it. I really believe they can fix this and find a way, as Andy said, come up with some solutions. I liked Andy's solution. I think they will come up with solutions. They're not stupid enough, maybe they are, to let this cash cow disappear.
Ironically, guys, this is the highest ratings that the NCAA basketball tournament ever had through the first two rounds.
Yes, absolutely. And I very much disagree, because the NBA, there's a ton wrong with the NBA right now. Luka Doncic's game against the Dallas Mavericks was the most watched game in the regular season in decades. I mean, we have more options now. That's just all it is. And as far as the NIL goes, it needs to be tweaked. But schools need to be more responsible with how they dole it out. UCF's entire football season was shot this past year because they gave all this money to KJ Jefferson, benched him within the first month. If you want to talk Kansas? Hunter Dickinson was the highest paid player in NIL. Had a decent year. Analytically, he did great. Look where Kansas ended up. Coleman Hawkins, $2 million to go to Kansas State. They made a run, 1-2 years ago? Didn't even have a winning record in the Big 12. So,
hey guys, let's do this. Let's move on to the handicapping this card here, because this is, for all intents and purposes, we're talking politics here. Whether it's inbred or not. But I think the people that are tuning in want to know about what we feel about what's going to happen this Sweet 16 round. And if you're here watching us, it's obvious that you found ProLine TV. We're back, and bigger and better than ever before. Would love you to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button down below. Hit the like button as well, because this is where you're going to find all of your sports handicapping information right here at ProLine TV. Hit the subscribe and the like buttons right now, if you will. And guys, let's move it over to the Sweet 16 round here right now. And it's always been my contention that the NCAA basketball tournament provides a unique handicapping opportunity. And it's unique in the sense that each round is its own round of handicap. And how do you handicap the Sweet 16? That's the question I want to run by everybody here. There's situations involving certain seeds and how they got here, teams that are playing the best defense and also the best offense. How are they doing here? Well, before I hand it off to everybody, I'll say this. I used to always chart the teams who arrived to the Sweet 16 round and graded how they played defensively. And the team that got to the Sweet 16 round that allowed the fewest points within the tournament have excelled over, above, and beyond. It was wild how well they did, especially when they were underdogs. Well, the team that has allowed the fewest points in the tournament here so far has been Duke. They've allowed 115. The team that has scored the most points per game has been Duke. They scored 192. So Duke checks both boxes here that way. And that's one of the reasons I feel they're a justified, obvious choice to win this basketball tournament. Andy, let me ask you this. How do you handicap the Sweet 16 if it's any different than any other form of the NCAA tournament?
Well, I sort of look at defense as well, but also keep in mind when you're talking about a team like Duke, they played arguably one of the 2 or 3 weakest teams in the field in the opening round, and then they played a decent team in round 2. So very often the best defensive efforts, I'd be interested to see, and maybe you have that data from the last few years, Mark, as far as like let's say the top 4 teams in the Sweet 16, based upon those defensive numbers, what their seeds were and what the path was to make it to the Sweet 16. Because I do believe there should be some sort of correlation because of the quality of competition that they face. Now, in the case of Duke, obviously with the number 1 seed, they faced an 8 or a 9, which would be basically a very difficult, significantly more difficult. They should balance out the effort against the 8 or 9 versus the effort against the 16. But I still, when I handicap the Sweet 16, I look at it. Well, first of all, I don't want to hear, like, for example, Kentucky, Tennessee. Well, Tennessee will be more focused because they lost the season. No, you don't need any more focus other than the fact that we win, our season continues. I don't care if we lost 13 straight games to the opponent. The opponent still has the same motivation that you do, win and advance. So I take a lot of the emotion out of it. Obviously, you do factor, or I do factor in injuries that may have occurred in the first 2 games, but I still look at the basic matchups. I go back and take a look at it as if I were handicapping a first round game, other than the fact that the competition that you're facing in the Sweet 16 is certainly by the results and probably to the seeds much more difficult than the first 2 rounds. So I don't do too much in the way of changing. I do like to take a look, since there are only 16 teams, what areas in their first 2 games that were supposedly strengths did those 16 teams not struggle in, and what areas that were considered weakness did those 16 teams overachieve?
Jim, let me ask you this question. Whether it's the NCAA basketball tournament, college basketball, NBA in general, or even NFL college football, we know that there's a large degree of variance in handicapping the coaches and how they prepare their teams. They have their styles. They have their personalities. How do you look at coaches when it comes to the Sweet 16 round? You look at those that have been there and done that, or coaches that are on the rise and doing it at the moment?
Well, I'd say yes to both questions. You look at a Tom Izzo, who's been there forever. You look at a Barnes, who has been there a lot as well. But you look at the success rate of both of them, and you have to say, well, what happens to Barnes in these situations? He somehow doesn't get over the top, but he has a very good team, and one of the teams that was ranked really high all year, but he did lose to Kentucky twice. Now, going back to what Andy was talking about, there's no more motivation, except the players know that they lost to these other players twice. It's just like a schoolyard game. They now know a little bit more about the other team and the other players and the moves they make and how they can stop them. Maybe you got a little bit more left, a little bit more right. You got to get in front of them. You got to box out a little bit more. You know that because you have the familiarity of playing 2 full games against them. So that does change it a little bit. And maybe there's no more motivation, but there's a little bit more knowledge. Now,
by the way, excuse me, one thing, Jim, because along the same lines with that same matchup, the Kentucky team, which won the 2 games, if I'm the coach, I say your 2 wins against Tennessee in the regular season mean absolutely nothing if you don't get win number 3.
Well, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, that's a little bit of motivation if you want to use that.
Your point is they're both totally motivated, of course. Win and go on.
Well, let me put it this way: they are equal. I would say the level of motivation is equal, because if you lose this game, either team, your season's over.
The level of knowledge of each player that they went up against before is higher than they would be if they're playing a team they'd not played before.
But that's true for both teams, though. That even the team that won the first 2 games, their knowledge about it. What I was going to mention, as far as coaches go, and then Jim continue. One of the things you look at is how did teams do in the round of 32. You had the entire week, 4 or 5 days to prepare for your first opponent. Now you've got less than 48 hours to prepare for your second opponent. So I place a great deal of emphasis of how teams do, or how coaches do, especially in that second game of the weekend set.
Well, that's what goes back to Mark's question about coaching. Who's more capable of making? First of all, you have to have the players to be able to do what you want them to do. That's number one. You got to have the right talent that a guy can adjust. So you can make adjustments with players that are more talented. So at this point with 16 teams, I wouldn't be surprised if any of these teams won straight up because the talent is there. And these are the best 16 teams by virtue of what they did all year and what they've done here in the tournament. The softer part of the schedule now is going to be the first part. So now you're looking at strength of schedule, like you pointed out. What route did you take to get here? The big knock on Duke is that he played such a weak schedule all year long, but you really can't knock what they've done with it. I mean, they've destroyed teams. They beat the shit out of everybody. Offensive and defensive, like Mark pointed out, they're rated number 1 in both categories, which is hard to ignore.
Well, you mentioned about they played a weak schedule, Jim, and my answer to that is often this: is it Duke's fault that they took on a weak schedule?
No, absolutely not.
No, absolutely not. It was a byproduct of the neighborhood they lived in. That's all.
Exactly, very much true. Now that you come into a game like this, let me pick on one game. I got to turn that off. Where was I? We're going to go to one game. I'm going to look at the Maryland game against Florida. One team is very deep, young coach on that team. The other team plays less players. Last second shot, whether the kid walked or not, is immaterial all the time. I don't give a shit about that. There's so many good calls and bad calls in every game, so you can't pick on one thing. It was a hell of a game. I enjoyed the game and I covered, so what the hell. But there's a situation where I look at styles. We haven't talked about that. When you look at styles, does this team likes to go 100 miles an hour? The other team likes to go 50 miles an hour. That cuts down on what the value of the point spread is, because if you're scoring 90 points, laying 9 is not so bad as if you're laying 9 and they're only scoring 50 points. The percentage of the total score is a big factor. So when you look at the styles of these coaches and what they're capable of doing if they can't play their style, and that's where the weaker schools on the first, say, 30 teams weren't able to do that a lot, because they don't have the depth of talent that can play in a different way. And they might not have the coaches to do it, but that's another subject. So there's a lot of things to go into it. I make numbers on every game. I have 7 power ratings on every team. Now, in the past, it's been really good. I have to admit up front, this has not been my greatest tournament that I've ever had. This has been very, very difficult. It's I'm going to rename it. I can't pick a winter tournament. That's my answer for this year. It's not that bad, but it seems like it is every day. It's a struggle. But that's kind of a long answer to your question. Sorry, but it took so long.
Hey, Tony, let me ask you this. We're talking about styles and handicapping, Sweet 16 games. Jim mentions that the coach's style. I really, really put a lot of weight into the coaches. And does how a coach has performed in the Sweet 16 round? John Calipari just nails it. He's 12-3 straight up into the number, Sweet 16 games. Chris Beard from Ole Miss has been in 3 of them. He's won and covered all 3 games. How much do you take into your equation of the coaches in the Sweet 16 round? And if not, what is it you're looking for first and foremost handicapping a Sweet 16 game?
Well, to answer your question, I think it has to be tied to temperament, because teams change and evolve. You have different personnel every year. Calipari's had all sorts of different teams. He's had more talented teams than you more often than not, and sometimes he's been in an underdog role. But the point is, how loose do you keep players? That's where the Rick Barnes factor comes in. Seems like early on in games that he shouldn't lose, he finds a way to lose, and I think that's out of the equation against Kentucky, because as you mentioned, they know Kentucky so well. They've lost to them twice. There's no factor in terms of this is going to be a revenge game. No, this is going to be a team that we know exactly what they're going to want to accomplish against us. And now we just have to overcome it one time out of 3 to move on and continue our journey, because all these teams at this point are thinking championship or bust, period. I don't think that Rick Barnes has had a point guard like Zakai Ziegler. And Ziegler runs everything that Tennessee does. He's probably not going to be a pro, but floor general-wise, he's a Mateen Cleaves type of orchestra leader, best point guard in the country. Everything runs through him. When he has the ball, it seems like Tennessee is set in knowing what they're doing. I mean, this is a really defined Tennessee team in that everybody knows their roles, and we'll just see if they shoot well and score well enough to beat Kentucky, because certainly they will get after you defensively. I think styles make fights is a great way to approach anything. I think that's in my bio on your on your site as to how I describe my handicapping style in any sport, but particularly this. And I'll end, because I can go on for days on this, but I'll end it with this. I think I would caution any bettors that are watching us out there. Doesn't matter what your bracket says. Analyze the matchup, because I know for a fact I've got Maryland over Florida in my bracket. It's not going to be that doesn't decide for me that I'm picking Maryland plus the points in this game. You got to go back and comb through it and make sure that you're making the right decision spread-wise.
In line with that, Mark, I was going to just mention with the coaches, okay? Smart coaches, you look for, and I sort of like what Tony does, I look for matchups, strength against weakness. What does one team do strong offensively that is a weakness of the other team? You can make it in football too. It's probably a little easier to understand in football. If I'm a smart coach, and I think Belichick was a good example of this, I'm going to make you beat me by succeeding with your weakness, because I'm going to take away your strength.
Good point. Real good point, Andy. Greg, how do you look at this, Greg, this coaching situation when we're this deep into the NCAA tournament, or are you looking at it from who these teams are and what they've accomplished this year?
Yeah, more of line the way Andy you just mentioned. I'm going to go. I especially this year. I think in my mind, I think you throw out all the trends because this is just a different era now, and we saw that in the first 4 days. And now maybe it won't change. Maybe the trends come back because the better teams are here, but I wouldn't go down that road because the trends have just killed a lot of us over the last several days. But what Andy was saying is correct. Like all I'm doing now is taking a look at the matchups. Like we went over the other day, Jim and I. Like for instance, the biggest one that sticks out to me is the Michigan State Ole Miss matchup. You have an Ole Miss team that is not very adept at shooting the three. They're okay. But they're just gone absolutely bananas shooting the three. Now they're facing a Michigan State team who just happens to be one of the best three-point shooting defensive teams in the country and one of the best rebounding teams in the country going against one of the worst rebounding teams in the country. So those are the things that I'm going to look at more than anything and just throw away the trends and also look for storylines. And as far as Duke is concerned, I agree. They're going to play who they're going to play. But take a look at their non-conference schedule. They played 4. If you want to count Illinois as 5, you can. I don't, but you played 4. Let's just count Illinois. You got 5. 5 good non-conference teams they played. They went 3-2. That's special? No, I don't think so. I'm not saying they're not good. What I'm saying is that I think we should take advantage of that. I think we should take advantage of the fact they're a 9.5-point favorite against Arizona, which I believe is going to be a real close game, and I think Arizona could beat Duke. I think we should take advantage of the fact that Houston and Auburn 5-1 to win the championship, and Duke is 2-1. No way should Duke be getting double over Houston and Auburn, because the reason they're 2-1 is that reason. Like you said, Mark, they're killing everybody that they're playing, so the stats are inflated. Baylor, we know, was an underachieving team, so they haven't really played anybody still in the tournament. They're finally going to play a team with a pulse. Let's see what happens in this matchup. But I just think we should take advantage of those situations. And I'm going to be, out of all the games, I think the great matchup that might really be exciting could be the matchup with Caleb Love playing against Duke, and exactly how that might be able to just make that a really fun game.
Last thing real quick, because we didn't cover it, is know where these games are being played. So the West region, Florida is a number 1, but Florida is in San Francisco. So Gators fans there'll be some that'll make the trip, but the bottom line is there's really no advantage to any of those teams, Florida, Maryland, Texas Tech, Arkansas. Also know that there are 3 basketball arenas and 1 football arena in this regional final round. You got the Chase Center, you got Prudential in Jersey.
Which is the football stadium?
In Atlanta, the football Lucas Oil. So
No, I mean, but which region? Where is it?
South
in the Midwest.
The Midwest. Okay.
So-
And who's got the best advantage for like regional, being close to their
Well,
home location is?
Have to be
I'll
Purdue.
definitely cover that. But the bottom line to know
Yeah.
why that's important is the 3 basketball arenas, sight lines will be fine. In football, they stick the court in the middle of things, and sight lines are all jaded. In the Midwest, I think is actually where all 4 teams they're at a disadvantage with the sight lines and the fact they're playing in a football arena, but all their fan bases can get there. Houston, Purdue, Kentucky, Tennessee. So it's the antithesis of the West. In the East, you're going to get a heavy Duke crowd. That probably gives them an advantage against Arizona. I think BYU travels extremely well. That might give them an advantage, but Alabama travels well too. And then the one region that I didn't cover there was the
East.
No,
Duke,
the
I
South.
think has. Yeah, I think
The
Duke has an
South.
advantage
The
in the
East is
East.
the Duke region. The South is Auburn, Michigan, Ole Miss, and Michigan State. Michigan State will obviously travel well, but that's advantage Auburn and Ole Miss and Atlanta.
By the way, along those same lines, in that Midwest region in Indianapolis, should the unthinkable happen and Purdue upset Houston, they're going to have a lot of local fans who will be buying up the tickets that Houston fans won't be able to use, nor will the fans of the Kentucky-Tennessee loser be able to use. So if Purdue happens to make it to the regional final, they might have 60-70% of that crowd support, because the losing teams in the first game will be looking to get rid of their tickets as they get out of town.
I agree with that, except Kentucky Tennessee fans are insane, and I think the winner of that game, I think their fans will stick around and give Purdue.
No, I'm talking about the
fans
loser of that game, the loser of that
Right.
Tennessee.
No, what I'm saying is
Yeah.
whoever wins that game is going to buy tickets off the loser and give Purdue a run for its money. Because normally you'd be absolutely right. It'd be a pro Purdue crowd.
You may be right, Tony, for one simple reason as well. The Kentucky-Tennessee loser will be determined first, because that's the first game of the 4, even though it's listed second on the schedule. You may be right. They have the first advantage.
All right, guys, we're handicapping the NCAA Sweet 16 tournament round here on Proline TV. We pretty much covered what we're looking at in the Sweet 16 round. And by the way, we mentioned Duke. There's a unique stat right here in our Playbook Sweet 16 guide that comes out that applies to Duke this particular week. And if you like situations, you'll like the Duke Blue Devils, knowing that number 1 seeds in the Sweet 16 round that have won and covered each of their first 2 games, as Duke has. They're 25-9 to the spread in the Sweet 16 round. So the momentum seems to continue to keep rolling for these number 1 seeds that are on a roll indeed. Let's take it over to the Elite 8 round. We'll move it up to Saturday and Sunday now and look at how we're going to handicap these rounds. And again, situations involving certain seeds and how they arrived here, I think, are very, very critically important here. The coach with the best record in this Elite 8 round coming in will be, if he makes it, Tom Izzo. No surprise. 8-2 straight up and 7-2-1 to the spread in Elite 8 round games. But the question I want to run by you here, Jim, is this. If Tom Izzo makes it to the Elite 8 round, and we know that there's never been a number 1 or number 2 seed that was not ranked in the AP preseason top 25 that has made the Final Four in 20 years, and if Michigan State arrives here, would you think that adds credence to the fact that Tom Izzo can break that streak, or is Tom Izzo, and he'll take care of business with what he's got?
Who would they be playing?
Michigan or Auburn?
Pardon?
Michigan or Auburn?
So it'd be Michigan State against Michigan.
Or Auburn.
Or Auburn, right? Which we wonder about. I wonder a little bit about Auburn because they flattened out a little at the end of the year, but they did play their last game well. That's if it's Michigan State, we got a rivalry from, like we talk about in football every year. It's the same thing in basketball. These fan bases are crazy. They hate each other, and that would be a dynamite matchup. Again, I would like Michigan State because I just think, to me, Izzo's got a little bit of magic going on this year. He's done a hell of a job. I don't think anybody really expected him to do this great a job this year, but he's done a hell of a job. They're playing well. He's a great coach. He makes great decisions. He makes adjustments, which a lot of coaches don't do. They go in with a game plan. They're not quick enough to make decisions, or their players are not able to make the changes, but he can do that. And he's done it forever. I mean, he's like 90 years old or whatever he is, but he's great. And I would have to go with the coach.
Jim, you just want somebody in this tournament to be older than you are. That's what you're saying, like 90 years old.
You know, Mark, it's harder every year to find somebody who's older than me.
That's a real good case in point. But you're talking to the choir as well, Jim. I got to say that. I got to throw that in there too. Andy, let me ask you this. We're talking about situations and patterns and how they work effectively. They work in handicapping this tournament. In the Elite Eight round, we found that number one seeds have done really rather well. They're 9-3 to the spread. Those that are number one seeds that make it to the Elite Eight round. On the other side of the coin, number three seeds are horrible. They're just 4-16 to the spread. That would be against Kentucky and Texas Tech if they happen to make it that far. Are there any patterns or other handicapping factors that you're looking at once these teams do arrive to the Elite Eight round?
I don't place a great amount of emphasis on the seeds that are meeting, because again, the path to getting there, like a 3 seed may do poorly in this round because more often than not they're facing a number 2 seed, which is arguably or supposedly the better team. Likewise, if things go to form, the number 1 seed is facing the number 4 seed, so that's a difference of 12 to 15 spots in the overall ranking. So I can understand the success of the 1s and the 2s versus that of the 3s and the 4s. But then again, we know that a number 1 seed to make it to the Sweet 16 will have gotten to the to that second by beating a 16 and a 9 or an 8. We don't know who they would face in the Sweet 16 to get to the round of the Elite Eight. But once again, I would take a great deal of look at quality teams that have. Remember, if you're in the Elite Eight, that means you've won 3 elimination games, sometimes 4 if you're in the if you're an 11 seed in that play-in game. To get there. So you've already proven yourself that with your season on the line, you can win 3 games. Now, again, we take a look at matchups. We take a look at the path that those teams got there. And if there's one thing I'll do, and I haven't done it yet for this week, but I'll add up the seeds of each of these Sweet 16 teams and what the total number of seeds that they beat. You may have done that, Marcus. I know that's along the lines of looking at trends and seeding matchups. And I'll take a look. I'll give a little bit of an added strength, maybe worth a half point to a point and a half for a team that beat, let's say, 3 single-digit seeds, and the total of the single-digit seeds is something like 13 or less.
Very good. Greg, what do you think about this Elite Eight round coming up here? I know that there's a pattern we called out in the Sweet 16 guide that teams have lost to the spread in both of their first 2 rounds, have really, really struggled in a Sweet 16 round tournament game, and if they make it to the Elite Eight round, that would be your Florida Gators right now. Are you expecting Florida to wake up from this funk that they're in, at least this point spread funk, and put the pedal to the metal in the Sweet 16 round?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Florida. If anything, I think it was a good thing that they played the 2-time defending champs who had won, obviously, 12 straight tournament games, and that it went down to the wire and that they had to come back a little bit.
By the way, Greg, they'd won 13 straight tournament games because they won their first round games. So that streak continued. And the ATS streak.
And Florida, even though they lost the spread in round 1, it was only a 1.5 as a 28-point favorite or whatever it was. So I'm not really too concerned with that. I would be concerned, no question, if the Maryland game, they win and that Maryland game was close. Same thing with Houston, if the Purdue game is close. I think when you're a number 1 seed and you win a close game, especially early in the tournament, you just have to come back strong the next one to just show that you've obviously, been there, done that. You're now experienced. You understand how to win in a must-win situation, even though everybody's expecting you to win. So, yeah. So, if anything, I think it's a good thing for both Florida and Houston to have been in that type of role, and I don't hold it against them. And as far as I'll tell you right now, the one matchup that I think would be the one that I'm not anticipating would be in the Elite Eight if, say, Arkansas were to win. Because if Arkansas, normally if we would have started the last week and talked about it, and we would have thought about who can make a run, sure, you could look at Arkansas and John Calipari and think, well, Calipari can do these things. But now that it would become real, that one would probably scare me, taking Florida, because he's just an X factor that you just, again, Florida Coach has done a nice job, but as you guys have pointed out, he is inexperienced. No way as experienced as John Calipari. So as far as the Elite Eight matchups, I think that could be the most interesting one, especially if you're talking about Florida because of Calipari's legacy.
Tony Mejia, Playbook expert, contributor to the Sporting News, and a great, great basketball handicapper. Tony, I got to ask you this question. What is it you want from your teams that you want to play on in this Elite Eight round? What is it you're expecting from them, or what is it that you would have wanted to see them do in this tournament that would give you the green light?
Well, look, I think that you need to break down the NCAA tournament the way coaches do, which is 3 separate 2-game mini tournaments to win your 6 games in a national title. So you flush what you just saw, you deal with what you see in the Sweet 16 round, and even then, unless there are injuries to take into your Elite Eight matchup, you start over again with the matchup that you're going to see, because really it just doesn't carry over. It's truly survive and advance. So, for instance, would I be worried about Maryland against Florida because Colorado State took them to the brink? No, I would not. What I would be worried about if I'm Maryland is trying to stay with Florida's depth, because you can't have Julian Reese in foul trouble if you want to match up with Florida's bigs, because they have so many of them, and you can't leave Derek Queen out on an island. It's got to be Reese and Queen, and then you can withstand Florida's great size. I don't know what Danny Hurley was talking about in terms of thinking that the officials jerked his UConn team around. I thought that was a fair whistle, and Florida is going to have the depth advantage size-wise over every team in this field. If you're Michigan State, I think that's the one team that I think has a clear advantage out of the 8 matchups that we're going to see in the Sweet 16 round, simply because I'm not sold on Ole Miss. And this is one thing that I personally will carry over in who have you beaten to get here more than how have you gotten here. And in that regard, I'd say that Ole Miss shot the lights out, where they're normally a very poor 3-point shooting team, to beat North Carolina, who had played a couple of days earlier and I didn't think belonged in this tournament. And then they beat an Iowa State team that down the stretch basically really was hampered by injuries and were a shell of themselves. Got through their first round game against Lipscomb, but again, Ole Miss threw the first punch and really led that game wire to wire. So now you have Ole Miss having not dealt with adversity, because they led both games. UNC made a second half run. Now, if Michigan State gets out there early, is there a sense where the Spartans can then run wire to wire, and then you'd lay the points, which is what I'm leaning to.
So, Andy, now we're in the Elite Eight round, and this question I want to throw in front of you. And I know some of our listeners out there probably feel a little bit the same way, that how do you approach backing a team that you've been correct on the first 2 rounds? You played them, they won and covered. You played them, they won and covered. I know there's no sense in hopping off the freight train now, but is there anything different that you do in this Elite Eight round? Like, in other words, are you looking to run with the hot hand, or are you looking for teams that have struggled a little bit, like Florida, to snap out and come back and beat a point spread?
Well, again, I think it comes really down to matchups. Obviously, if you've won and covered, that means that team has exceeded public expectations, if you want to look at it that way, in the first 2 games, and certainly in the first 3 games, for example, if you're talking through the Sweet 16. So I would take a look towards that team, especially if they are an underdog, and at least one of their first 3 wins came outright as an underdog. I would look to back such a team, but it still comes down to the matchups, and again, the coaches between the 2 of them. Remember, this is like an opening. It's like the first 2 rounds. In the Elite Eight, you've had only 4. You've had 48 hours to prepare for that opponent, because you were preparing for the first 3 or 4 days for the guys that you had to get past to get to the Elite Eight. So again, I do give a little bit of credit for teams that have won and covered, especially if one of those win and covers was as an underdog. But if it doesn't meet the other criteria, like the matchups don't seem to work, I would either pass that game, or I don't know that I would necessarily play the other game, because the other thing we can keep in mind is that if a team is 3-0 ATS in the tournament, you may be paying a little bit of a price to back that team in the Elite Eight, unless its opponent is also 3-0, in which case you've got 3 good teams. Now, on the other hand, you may pay more of a price if the team you're backing is 3-0 and the opponent they're facing, and I don't know if there is any such team in this year's tournament that is 0-3 or would be 0-3, right? They can only be 0-2 right now. So again, it comes down to the individual matchup. Yes, I'll consider strength of schedule again, especially how those teams have performed, how the opponents of those, how the conference affiliations of those teams have performed throughout the tournament so far. The SEC, I think, got off to a little bit of a struggle on Thursday, but then on Friday they did well and they've advanced in. Now, keep in mind, however, they had 14 teams, only 7 advanced. I say only 7. That's 50% of the teams that got invited. 4 Big 10 teams made it. 4 Big 12 teams made it. They didn't. I don't think either of them got 8 bids.
Very good. Let's do this, guys. Let's move on to the Final Four right now, and I'm going to ask you who your Final Four teams are. We'll talk about this next week on the show as we do our Final Four and championship round podcast next week. But as we're getting ready for this week, I'm going to ask you who your Final Four is. And also, if your Final Four isn't 100% perfect, which team would apple cart or be the surprise team that snuck in there that wouldn't surprise you at all? I'm going to say this because it's been chalk in this tournament so far. I don't think anybody would be surprised to see Auburn against Florida and Duke against Houston that way. Jim, how do you see the Final Four pairing up?
Well, I do everything with ratings. And the one team that I think could sneak in that is playing a very dynamic team this week that is explosive as hell, but they can come in often with, marginal efforts. And I don't know how else to say that, but the one team that I'm looking at that could really sneak in that you wouldn't expect to be there from the get-go because they don't get a lot of ink through the season and stuff would be BYU. I think that when you look at the way Alabama plays, they can beat you by 40 or lose by 25. They tremendous talent, move up and down the floor, but BYU has a lot of talent and they can stay with them in my opinion. And when I look at the numbers, there's 2 teams that have outstanding numbers that you would not really think that they would be there at the end, but they are playing, their numbers are just tremendous, and that's BYU and Michigan. But if Michigan has to play Michigan State, that's going to be a real problem because of styles. But this BYU team can play with Auburn, and they can play at the pace Auburn wants to play. The question will be, not Auburn, I'm sorry, Alabama. The question will be, can Alabama overcome some of that coldness that they have, that inefficiency they have at times? Because when they're right, they're really tough. So that would be the team I think could make it into the group.
So we're going to put.
Other than that, you got the 4 number ones from the beginning. Look real. I mean, Purdue has some advantages, but against Houston, I don't see it. And Houston overcame a very, very poorly seeded team with Gonzaga. Gonzaga was way better than an 8, and they overcame a very tough team there. And this is a much easier game for Houston. So that's a number 1 that gets in there. I think Florida is going to do a job on Michigan because of their depth. When you get to Duke, I can't go against the numbers that you pointed out, Mark, in the beginning. Offensively and defensive, they rated real high. No, they ran into Connecticut, which is a very well-coached team.
Yes, they are.
Hurley is a nut job sometimes. He blames everybody but himself. But he knows how to coach, and he's won 2 championships in a row. He's going for a 3-peat, and they went down like the Chiefs did. So when you look at that, I'm looking at Florida. I look at the Duke, the number 1s. Who goes down? It's probably Auburn. I think Auburn's the one team that could go down. didn't like the way they finished off the season. And it's no knock on Bruce Pearl because the guy can coach too. He's a hell of a coach. But they did soften up at the end, and I think they're vulnerable.
So I'm going to put you down for BYU as your surprise team
Yes.
To make the Final Four. Before I turn this over here to Greg and ask him the same question, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my surprise team that I mentioned in the Final Four. If all four number 1 seeds do not make it, which one would be apple carting and be the surprise? My vote would be for Arkansas. And it's like, whoa, we got a number 10 seed in here against these number 1 guys. What's going on here? But you got a coach with a lot of pedigree coming out of a real strong conference here. And if they can handle Texas Tech, we'll see whether or not Florida can get their act back together to get past them. They're that way. Greg, how do you see the Final Four teams and your Final Four teams? And if not, which team would be the surprise?
Well, Tony and I already have BYU in, so those would obviously be our surprises. So if I have to pick another one, I'd probably go with Michigan because they're playing just so well right now. They've got the 2 7-footers. They've got a point guard who's extremely confident, who can shoot the big clutch shot at the end if they need it. They're well coached. So that would be my pick. If I wasn't going, again, I'm obviously sticking with BYU, but if I had to pick another team, I would pick Michigan.
Michigan for Greg. Okay, we got a BYU, we got an Arkansas, we got a Michigan. Tony Mejia, who do you see as this upset apple cart team that makes it in spite of if all 4 number 1s don't get there?
Well, again, I'm going to repeat. I've got my bracket, but it's a whole separate entity, and my Final Four is still alive. It's Auburn, Texas Tech, Houston, BYU. So if I'm not saying BYU, I'll say Texas Tech, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the plays that I'm going to give out to clients. I'm going to look at it, because again, you fill out this bracket. I at least do it 30 minutes before the tournament starts, and then games happen, and the bracket ends up being either similar or completely different to what you envisioned. But my Final Four is still intact. And my Final Four was Auburn over Texas Tech, Houston over BYU. So we will see what happens there. But I think BYU has a legitimate chance to beat both Alabama and Duke, simply because we're going to see a pair of track meets in that region in Newark, because you have teams that prefer to play up-tempo styles. BYU is at its best when it's up-tempo. They can get Saunders going from the perimeter, and they rebound as well as anyone. Keita is a hell of a big man. He's going to give Malawak all he wants. It's going to be a great matchup if we see that in the Elite Eight between Duke's freshman big man and Keita, who's more experienced. And then they've got guys behind him. And Alabama, if they're not hitting the ball well, and I don't know what the status of one of their best shooters, Stevenson, is, because he got hurt in the St. Mary's game. Well, we've seen it before. We've seen it where Alabama is expected to win as a 1 seed last season, and then the shots that they fire up, missing is contagious, just the way making is contagious. So if they have a poor shooting night, I think BYU gets by them. In fact, that I'm sure I'm going to pull the trigger on. So I'll go ahead and give that out. And then Arizona absolutely wants to push up tempo. They have some of the most athletic guards remaining in this tournament, which is why they're going to give Duke all they want.
Tony, can I ask Tony a question? Because I did hear that he said Texas Tech in the Final Four is a possibility. He likes them. When Texas Tech suffered this year with some injuries, now, in your opinion, are they back and healthy 100%? Because, they're going up against Arkansas. Calipari just had the big win over Pitino, which is kind of an emotional thing because they're two old coaches. The rumor is they didn't really care for each other, but I don't know if that's true or not. But, but that's immaterial. But the Texas Tech advantage over Arkansas, what do you see that as being? Because I have a pretty big advantage to Texas Tech in this game.
Well, I had Texas Tech over St. John's here, and to pull that trigger pre-tournament, I'm going against the one team that I was rooting for in this tournament in my Johnnies. So, look, to answer your question, no, they're not 100% chance. McMillan has been out. We'll see what his status is, because he was a game-time decision that didn't play for the Red Raiders, and pretty solid all-around guard that they would like to have in the fold at least 10, 15 minutes. And to educate our viewers who don't know, Arkansas's leading scorer, Adu Thiro, who followed Calipari from Kentucky and is an NBA borderline fringe first round prospect, as he's a two-way player, is going to play. So he has not played all tournament, did not play in the SEC tournament, is back. I think Calipari announced that either this morning or yesterday. Got my dates mixed up because I just see information as it comes in my feed. The bottom line is Arkansas is going to be at full strength here. So that's another reason to potentially like Arkansas. I advanced Texas Tech. I just think that I love the way McCasland's teams play. And McCasland came over from North Texas, where they played as slow as molasses. He has really gotten into the Big 12 spirit of things, and they play a little faster. Big 12 Player of the Year is JT Toppin, the New Mexico transfer, who was the Big 12 Player of the Year. Really a load inside and has had a hell of a tournament. So, Arkansas is going to have to find a way to contain him.
Okay. Andy Iskoe, TheLogicalApproach.com. Who's your surprise team in the Final Four this year? Who should we keep an eye out for?
Well, my original Final Four were Auburn, Houston, St. John's, and Michigan State. So St. John's is gone. The other three are still there. I still give them a chance, although I'm a little bit weaker on Michigan State than I was at the start. And I could
actually, Andy, you had Michigan State, St. John's, Duke, and Houston.
Duke and Houston. Okay, that's right. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'm a little bit weaker on Michigan State now. I kind of think that Auburn comes out of that region, so that would not be a surprise. I think Houston comes out of the Midwest. I don't think that that would be a surprise. I think they'll get by Purdue, and I think they'll get by the winner of Kentucky, Tennessee, despite the fact that that I don't place a great deal of emphasis on emotion. When you've got two emotional, motivated teams going up against each other with that familiarity, the winner of that Kentucky-Tennessee game might have expended a little bit more energy than Houston might have to expend against Purdue. So I have those two regions going to form. I would not be surprised. I do like this Texas Tech team, and of course I like Arkansas and Calipari. I would not be surprised if the winner of the Arkansas-Texas Tech team defeats Florida. But at the start of the tournament, I felt better with the chances of Texas Tech, so I'll put that in as my surprise team. As far as the other region goes, I could also say the case I expect whoever wins between Duke and Arizona to defeat BYU or Alabama. I could certainly see BYU defeating Alabama and then losing to Duke or Arizona. I will stick with Duke again because of their dominant performance, but I would not be surprised if Arizona gets the point spread cover in that game.
And so your surprise in the Final Four, Andy, is who?
Texas Tech.
Texas Tech. Okay. We've got a couple of Texas Techs in here. Jim, who was yours? I'm sorry, Jim, once again?
BYU.
BYU, okay. And I'm alone on an island with Arkansas. Okay.
Well, I'm right. I'm sort of there with you because I say whoever wins this game, Texas Tech or Arkansas, makes the Final Four. But I've gone with Texas Tech. But it's like 1 and 1A. Arkansas is 1A.
I've got you. All right, let's close out the show. I'm going to turn it over to Greg DePalma, our producer, as he wants to go around the horn with some final thoughts and questions. Greg, if you will, I'm handing it off to you.
All right, sounds good. So it's short time. This is when we go around and everybody gets their input on 60 seconds or less for whatever it is that they want to talk about. If they want to make any picks, obviously, if they have any college basketball picks, they can do that. So let's start with my full-time college basketball co-host buddy, Jim Feist.
Well, I'm gonna. We haven't talked about anything in this range, but let's go with BYU Alabama over the total as my play for this round. I think both teams are going to be damn close to 90 in the scoring department, and who knows, you might even get an overtime.
All right, Tony, you're up. You have a short for us, a pick?
Come back to me because I'm going to give you something.
All right, Mark?
Well, I'm not going to give you a pick, but I'm going to give you a comment here. And my comment is this. With March Madness dominating the conversation right now, I'm going to hop off that train and onto the tracks of another fan favorite. That's the NFL Draft, which is just a month away. Our lads, who Greg DePalma is a proud producer of that show and works as an editor on that site, Our Lads is the leading nation's when it comes to evaluating college football talent. They released their 3.0 version, their mock draft of who they feel is the best talent in the country, and nowhere to be found in the top 10 is Miami quarterback Cam Ward, who is currently the favorite to go number 1 overall. Our Lads has him as the number 11 choice in terms of overall talent, and it said that he's the first choice by quarterback poor Tennessee. So the question becomes, does he warrant being the first player of the draft, or should that go to someone like Notre Dame athlete Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner, or even Penn State edge Abdul Carter? All I know for sure is one thing. The last defensive lineman to go number 1 overall in the draft was Myles Garrett of the Browns in 2017.
Wow.
And that wasn't too bad. That worked out pretty well for the Browns.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and again, keep in mind now is the Our Lads top 32. So that's available on their website. And you're right, Mark. And look, it probably will happen. I think the closer we're getting to the draft, the more and more it appears that we get these 2 quarterbacks going 1-2, which the Giants would just absolutely. I mean, look, I know there are a lot of fans in New York that probably are oh, we want Ward or we want Sanders, but trust me, Giant fans, it'll benefit you like nothing else if those 2 quarterbacks go first and second, and you can get either Carter or Hunter. That's what you want if you're a Giant fan. And that's the reason Our Lads has those 2 quarterbacks outside the top 10, because that's where they belong. They're not that good. So therefore, don't reach. Reaching in the NFL draft is not a good thing.
Good points. Good points.
All right, Andy, are you ready?
Just a moment here. Let me get set. Yes, I am.
Okay.
And let me do 3, 2, 1. I'm going to go also with a total in this in this round of 16, and I'm going to look for the over in the Duke-Arizona game. I thought the total in the in the Arizona-Oregon game was significantly lower than it should have been. I think it was a couple of points lower than this one, and that one was flying over, and I could see the same thing happening in this game as well. Duke is going to be finally facing a team that can match up with them as far as offense goes. Both teams average over 80 points per game during the regular season. It's going to be a fast-paced game, I believe. Duke will be a little bit stronger defensively, but I still think Arizona is going to be able to force the kind of pace that it's like. We saw how quickly they got off against Oregon in their game last Sunday, and I'm sorry, how they came back against Oregon after Oregon got off to that, I think, 20-9 lead or something. So I'm going to look for this to be the most entertaining game of the weekend. I'm not going to put it past Arizona to not pull off the upset. Like I said, I like them with the points, and I like the game over the total.
All right. Another over. We got Duke, Arizona from Andy, and Jim has Alabama, BYU over. So,
I also sort of secondarily said Arizona plus the points, so let's put that in.
Okay, so you got a parlay over and Arizona plus. What is it now?
I wouldn't play it as a parlay, but yes, you could.
I've seen a couple 10s on that game, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Matter of fact, I think I just saw the line go up in the Michigan one too, if I'm not mistaken. I think I saw that. Yeah.
I don't have that open.
So, all right.
Look, if Tyrese Proctor keeps shooting 80% from 3-point range, nobody's beating Duke. We can all just go home right now.
Yeah.
All right, Tony.
By the way, one little comment
here. Wasn't there a player, Caleb Love, didn't he play at North Carolina State against Duke and beat him?
Yeah, North Carolina. Yeah, we talked about that on our show the other day. And again, he went off in the Final Four game. What was that, 2022, Tony?
Yep. Yeah, he's had some great moments and he's had some bad moments. But yeah, he was the backcourt mate for RJ Davis there for a few years.
Yeah, I think he had 28 points in their Final Four game, and then they lost the championship game. Was it the Kansas?
Came in same recruiting class. Yep.
Okay, you ready,
I was going to mention about.
I keep saying you're ready, Tony, and then he keeps talking. Go ahead, Andy.
I was just mentioning it there. No, I was talking about Chris Beard and Ole Miss. Remember, Beard made his reputation on defense when he was with Texas Tech. This Mississippi team now is a very strong offense, and actually, if you look at their defensive numbers, they're not all that impressive. That's what makes that a compelling matchup against Michigan State.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's why they hired McCaslin to replace him, because they wanted to keep that gritty style, and now Texas Tech is a better offensive team than they are a defensive team, even though they still have those defensive principles. But I mean, you have to evolve. That's just the way it is. All right, whenever you're ready, G.
Go right ahead, Tony.
All right, well, Jim Feist and Andy Iskoe are very fortunate that I don't live in Las Vegas, or I would be dragging them out to the college basketball crown on March 31st and April 1st at the MGM Arena. And we're going to have a 16-team field, so two sets of 4 games. It's a made-for-TV event, 4 NIL money. So I mean, this is college basketball 2025 to the umpteenth level. But I'm going to give you a play. It's Tulane plus the points. It's my buddy Eric Musselman's USC Trojans. I just think the Green Wave will be more enthused to play in this event, to play a USC, and they're getting 7.5. I think they might win that game outright. So USC really struggled down the stretch in the Big Ten. Give me the Green Wave. But again, that tournament starts on the 31st with 4 games per day. So you'll get your college basketball fix heading into next week.
Yeah, I guess we got to keep an eye too on since the transfer portal's open, on whether or not any players on any of those teams will still be hanging around or not. Who knows?
Yeah, look, UCF's leading scorer declared for the draft, and he's going to play in it. So you're absolutely right. You have to do your homework on it, because there are some guys that are going to say, I'm done. Some guys are going to play to enhance their potential. Some guys are going – in fact, I've seen coaches say, select guys that have hit the portal will still get to play in this. UCF has got 3 guys in the portal and 1 guy declaring pro. I think 2 are playing and 2 are not in this event. And they're not the only program that has this type of portal situation.
There's a little bit more complexity in picking games, man. Okay.
And we're going to definitely be talking more about the NFL once we get into April and are done with the Final Four. We're also going to be getting into the Major League Baseball season real soon, too. The season, of course, really gets going tomorrow. We're recording this, of course, on Wednesday. So we'll have some baseball coverage as well here. And as Mark was saying with our lads, this is last year's guide. But this is the draft guide that comes out. Matter of fact, it'll be at the end, probably April 7th or 8th. This is going to be mailed to your mailboxes when you order them. So just check out the ourlads.com website to order the Our Lads draft guide, because if you're really into the draft, I mean, they have about 98% of the players that are going to be drafted on all 7 rounds and on every team, as far as a little write-up, a little scouting report for each player. And that'll give you an opportunity to really know what the heck's going on if you're a big draft fan.
An absolute must-have, Greg. Absolutely, no doubt about it. I call it the Blue Ribbon College Basketball Yearbook of NFL Draft Guides. Yeah. There's so much detail in what it is that Our Lads does with that. Everybody has to get a copy of this draft guide from Our Lads this football season.
All right.
By the way, Greg, I wanted to ask you, Greg, are we going to be doing anything in about the Masters, which I think begins the Thursday after the Final Four?
Sure Brady will cover that, right?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. As far right now, the way we have it set up, actually on our golf show, Brady Cannon, who's our golf handicapper, will obviously be there. But Jared Smola, who is my golf handicapper for 2 years prior, is going to join us as well, as will Hall of Famer Jan Stevenson. So nice. All 4 of us are going to talk about the Masters, but I'm definitely going to try to see if we can get one of them to appear on this show, which I think also answers your question, Andy, the week of the Masters, which is in 2 weeks. Yep. So
we'll bring Jen on, I would say, Greg, because she still is a sight for sore eyes.
Yes, I will definitely try to see if I can do that. If she can only make 1 appearance, I'll tell her to make this one.
Good.
So, all right, Mark, that closes it out.
All right, guys, that's going to put the final wraps on the show. I would say that the consensus of what the show is all about today, if I could put it into short 1 sentence, is blame it on the transfer portal and the NIL for everything we've seen in the March Madness tournament so far. Next week, we're back with our Final Four version of the podcast here. So for Andy Esco from TheLogicalApproach.com in Vegas, Jim Feist, the legend himself in Las Vegas, Tony Mejia, Playbook experts and contributor to Sporting News, our producer extraordinaire, Greg DePalma. This is Mark Lawrence, reminding you to always to remember to bet with your head, not over it, and good luck as always.